Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. This is October the 22nd, broadcasting from South Carolina. On this show, I try to go over some current events, some current issues, mainly the things that I've been taking a look at in my articles, which you can find at activistpost.com. I write for that website on a regular basis. It always helps me to go check out my articles there. Also, you can go to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com to keep up with my work. I repost all of my articles there. I have links to my books there. I repost all of my interviews, all of the archive broadcast of Truth on the Tracks at that site as well. I'm also the author of four books. You can go to falseflagpublications.blogspot.com in order to find those as well. And of course, Truth on the Tracks, ucy.tv. You can catch this show every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 1 hour and rebroadcast again on Friday nights. So this is a place to be in any event. You can check out this show regularly. We'll be here every week. Again, as I said earlier, I try to tackle some current events and some things that have been in the news that I've been paying attention to lately in hopes that they will mean something to you and that you might be able to glean some information from them and use it here in the future. Unfortunately, a lot of times I believe we here in the alternative media suffer from a tsunami of information, a data overload of sorts, where we constantly recycle the events that are happening day by day. We worry so much about what's coming, what's going to happen, what's going to be done to us next, that we don't necessarily ever get off the ground in terms of solutions, that we don't necessarily get to work in terms of changing the system that we complain about. And I will be mentioning a potential solution here shortly on the air. But first I want to get into an article that I've written recently dealing with the national ID in the UK. Now, I've dealt with the national ID issue on several several different articles, actually, several different occasions. And I've dealt with the national ID not only in the United States, but the UK, and Ireland, Australia, Japan, India, most notably, where they're having a biometric ID program for over 1 billion people in India. This is mandatory, if you haven't heard about that. Biometrics programs moving in Australia, where they are going under a fast tyranny in Australia with carbon taxes and laws that prevent you from even questioning or blaming higher prices on the carbon taxes, as well as an open national ID in Japan. Now, in the United States and the UK, things tend to be a little bit more subtle. They tend to come at it through different methods, through a lot of different ways. It's usually covert, and it's usually presented as something that will enhance convenience. And it's usually it seems to be that our society will be one of a few, but maybe the only society, this current society, that's willingly gone under tyranny. Previous societies have all gone under tyranny, but they seem to have done so out of fear, or not just ignorance, but mainly fear. And while that doesn't excuse it, you can at least understand why it happened. Our current society, however, is willingly going under scientific dictatorship, laughing all the way. But this article, which is up on activistpost.com, is entitled UK to Introduce National ID Scheme Using Mobile Phones and Social Media Profiles. And it says, early on in 2012, I wrote an article regarding India's implementation of the Unique Identification Program for all of its 1.2 billion residents, entitled Cashless Society, India Implements First Biometric ID Program Despite Growing Concern, where I detailed the history, mechanisms, and ultimate goals of the program. The Unique Identification Program is for short called the UID, by the way. I followed this report by an article entitled Japan Proposes Next Phase of Centralized Surveillance, dealing with the new Japanese UID with a similar analysis. But while news of India and Japan's massive national ID program was met with much surprise by many even in the alternative media, it may once again come as a surprise that yet another push for a national ID is on the way, this time in the UK. Now I'll break away from the article just briefly before I get into it anymore and point out that the national ID was tried, openly tried in the UK shortly after 9/11. It was rejected by the British people. Therefore, they have to do as they do in the United States. They have to come at it from a different angle. They have to come at it in a more covert fashion. And they have to use the convenience aspect and the snob appeal aspect to sell it to the people here at the bottom. Back to the article. Like the Indian and Japanese icebreaker, the UK program is being developed in concert and collusion between the UK government and international corporations. To be clear, the English version of the national ID is not the same as the Indian program. Biometrics have yet to enter into the equation. See, in India, this is me again, in India, the unique identification is based on biometrics. It's iris scans, palm scans, and facial photographs. And it's all included in one database where you're given a number, and it's again, as I pointed out earlier, it's mandatory. Back to the article. In fact, at this point, the UK is only attempting to implement a virtual ID under the Identity Assurance Program. Yet the scheme is still raising some ire amidst privacy advocates and those still conscious enough to be aware that they are passengers on a train headed for a system of total surveillance and control if the engine is not soon shut off. Others, of course, simply recognize the public-private partnership required to develop this type of system as a threat to their personal data and a potential source of unprecedented identity theft. Nevertheless, the new backdoor national ID scheme is being ushered into the UK using similar justifications as that used by the Indian government when the UID program began, i.e., that the new program will improve and streamline the process of requesting, granting, receiving, and distributing government benefits and/or aid. While India argued that the UID would cut down on fraud, the UK suggests that the program will free up an already clogged system due to a ravaged economy and allow for a smoother and more streamlined process of distribution. Now, to back out of the article again, I would like to point out that, of course, as listeners to this show would be well aware of, or should be well aware of, as particularly my readers should be aware of, that I am not a laissez-faire capitalist. I do not espouse Austrian economics. I think that is the wrong way to go. That is the opposite direction that we should be taking. I'm a firm supporter of the social safety net programs. But I'm also aware that in the middle of an economic collapse that was designed, that part of the goal is to get not only the American people, but get any people on the government dole and dependent upon government. So then you can impose austerity and you can control these people based on the services that you would have provided otherwise. So this is a double-edged sword. Now, of course, there's so many people in the social safety net in England, in the UK, because of the economy. The economy is stagnant in England, and it has been for many, many years. It's also the fact that they brought in so many immigrants from other countries and advertised the welfare system in England for immigrants. That's another topic. But again, I want to say that I'm a firm supporter of social safety net, but we also have to understand what it can be used for as well. Just about anything good that exists in the hands of governments and corporations and militaries are used for evil, so we have to be aware of that. Perhaps we'll talk about that again in a future broadcast. Back to the article. As Ian Burrell of The Independent writes, The government will announce details this month of a controversial national identity scheme which will allow people to use their mobile phones and social media profiles as official identification documents for accessing public services. People wishing to apply for services ranging from tax credits to fishing licenses and passports will be asked to choose from a list of familiar online logins, including those they already use on social media sites, banks, and large retailers such as supermarkets to prove their identity. Once they have logged in correctly by computer or mobile phone, the site will send a message to the government agency authenticating that user's identity. It has been reported that the cabinet, end quote. Back to my article. It has been reported that the Cabinet Office has held talks with agencies and organizations such as the Post Office, this is quote from Burrell again, Post Office, high street banks, mobile phone companies, and technology giants ranging from Facebook and Microsoft, Google, PayPal, and BT, end quote. Of course, you know that in any totalitarian system, in any system of control, big corporations have to get involved because this is a fascist system, fascist global system, where big banks, big corporations, big governments, big militaries, big secret societies, they all work hand in hand for the same goal. And they're all going to skim off the top and fleece the little people down at the bottom. They fleece the profane if they can. Back to the article. The system is supposed to be rolled out for trial in April when the Department of Work and Pensions introduces the system overhaul known as the Universal Credit Scheme. Essentially, government services are being grouped together on one website, which will be gov.uk, which will be accessible via mobile phone. Those wishing to access the services will be able to log in with their already established login IDs set up with private companies. The government claims that the ID systems and procedures, quote, have been subjected to security testing before being awarded their Identity Provider Kite Mark, the IDP Kite Mark, meaning that they have made the list of between 5 and 20 approved organizations that will be announced on October the 22nd, end quote. Those using the new virtual ID program will be asked to identify themselves by picking their preferred corporation from the NASCAR screen, the name of the logo field directory on the website. On this website, they apparently have this screen that's filled with the logos that look like the NASCAR drivers, their vehicles and their driving suits, because governments would never collude with major corporations, correct? That's why they have NASCAR screens. As Ian Burrell describes, quote, major websites are able to recognize individuals by their patterns of use, the device they are accessing from, and its locations. Facebook, for example, asks users who sign on from an unusual location to take a series of security questions, including identifying friends and photographs. Now, Facebook's already doing that, and they're not doing that in the UK, they're doing it here in the United States. And I know that because it asked me to do that last week when I accessed Facebook. And yes, I will admit to some level of hypocrisy in all of my complaints about the evil Facebook. I do have a Facebook account, so I will admit some hypocrisy in that regard. But occasionally you have to go into the matrix to pull people out of it. So that is why that page exists. Back to the article. Much like the Japanese version of the Indian UID, the Basic Resident Register, the IAP, is given the perception of being decentralized. For instance, the Cabinet Office has consistently stated that the data provided through accessing the IAP will not be held centrally by any government agency. However, like the Japanese JukiNet, the fact is that the data will be included inside a centralized database. There is simply no way around it. That's true. At the very least, they're putting it on one central website. Thus, while the Cabinet Office states that the various corporations involved in the program will not know the government agency, which government agency is requesting information, both the agencies and the corporations are themselves a part of a centralized database, the very least of which is being the gov.uk website where individuals will go to access their services. With this in mind, are we really to believe that such information will sit eternally unmolested by the UK central government? The Japanese made the mistake of resting with this assumption early on with the basic resident register and the My Number bill as well. Unfortunately for them, it was just a few years before the localized database became openly centralized. That's true. If you want to take a look at that, I have links to both of the articles that I did on the Japanese JukiNet and the Indian UID here in this article. UK to introduce national ID scheme using mobile phones and social media profiles, activistpost.com. Furthermore, simply setting up minuscule barriers such as using the selected corporations as filters for inquiries and distribution of information is largely meaningless in a world where such a small number of large corporations, banks, and other industry giants essentially own the government. Again, the question must be asked, are we really to believe that information sharing between such powerful corporations and governments will not occur due to the high ethical standards of either one? If the answer to this question is affirmative, surely they jest. And that's true. I mean, corporations like Facebook have an open line, and Google have an open line between governments. These two corporations alone essentially are the NSA, and of course we enable them. We enable them by giving them all of our information, but at least are we going to be at least intelligent enough to understand that creating a database that links these corporations with governments is simply a centralized national ID database. I mean, this is really an insult to the intelligence. Well, I would say the average person, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's accurate. They get away with it for, they've been getting away with it for years. So I always cringe a little bit when I hear researchers or talk show hosts or writers say they think you're stupid. They think you're that stupid. Well, we are, apparently, because it's been working. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So why not give us ridiculous propaganda? Why not tell us that radiation's good for us? We've been eating GMOs for years. We haven't complained about that. Take vaccines like nobody's business. So we give up all our rights to defend us against Al-Qaeda, but we support Al-Qaeda when they go to overthrow aging dictators on the African continent. Or Syrian leaders. So why not? Why not say that we should have a database set up that's centralized with major corporations and governments working together? Why not do that and then tell us it's localized and that the corporations or the government won't know what the other hand is doing? I'm sure that the vast majority of the UK population will just knuckle under as they've been doing for years. Why not? They've taken a lot worse. We've taken a lot worse over here, and we're going to continue to take worse because that's the agenda. Unless we start to mount a resistance here in the near future, and I will mention a possible first step in that regard here in a minute. Back to the article. Nevertheless, one must wonder how long it will be before the UK database becomes openly centralized like the Japanese JukiNet and Basic Resident Register program. One must also wonder how long the system will exist before reports of illegal information sharing begin to circulate within the media, subsequently culminating in the confirmation of such information sharing out in the open with no legal repercussions. How long will it be before the information sharing process is then codified into law? And essentially what I'm trying to say here is they'll introduce this program, this database for better access of government services, and then shortly thereafter you will hear reports of are these corporations really sharing information to the government? Is the government really requesting this information from the corporations? And of course they are. Of course, anyone with two brain cells to rub together would know that they are. But you'll see this coming out in the media. And then you'll see the confirmation. You'll see the government admitting that they make these requests. You'll see the corporations admitting that they acquiesce to the request, and they give the information to the government. And what will happen? Nothing. Nothing will happen. There will be no legal repercussions. Perhaps there will be an investigation, perhaps not. because taxpayers can afford those kinds of things. They can afford perpetual war, but not investigations when the governments or big corporations are taking advantage of them. And so what would happen after that? Nothing. And will the people engage in protest and mass demonstrations and march on the British Parliament? Will they pull out of Facebook or stop using Google? Not a chance. Not a chance. Back to the article. If you think it sounds like the above questions are more a list of predictions than possibilities, you would be right. That's because using history as a guide, whether it be the Japanese basic resident register, India, Germany, Argentina, Belgium, Colombia, Spain, Peru, or Italy, the same roadmap is almost always followed with the same results almost always being achieved. The establishment of a massive, all-encompassing biometric database containing information gleaned from every aspect of life by corporations, government, and other sources. Of course, government databases and control are not the only concerns arising out of the new UK program. As 21st Century Fix reports, there is also the issue of the commercial sale of the personal information submitted by the individual accessing his government services by the corporations facilitating that transaction. The report states, quote, I would, however, add a third reason not to proceed. I simply, frankly, don't want to access government services using a privately contracted device I use in the rest of my life. That is to say, for me the real issue is the privatization of a virtual ID card system, that companies such as, for example, Facebook, with all its manifest privacy issues, should seriously be considered a partner in such a scheme is indicative of why so many social media sites now want us to use real identities. For there's real money in them thar hills for owners of real identity databases. The really long-term business plan becomes ever more clear, doesn't it? Information creep was bad enough when government suggested real-time internet snooping. Knowing the efficiency of the private sector in extracting personal data from us to generate private profit, the Lord only knows what might happen when corporations get officially involved, and what's more, with the full force of the law behind them in their every act and deed. End quote. And he's exactly right. Of course, I hope you would know anyway that the governments all over the world have been tracking and tracing everything you do online in real time and have been storing that data. I did a report for Activist Post several months ago. Actually, this might have been close to a year ago, from the Brookings Institution, who had released their own report where they estimated that it would only be in the tens of thousands of dollars in terms of cost to record, to monitor in real time, record and store for a year all of the transactions, all of the online footprints, all of the online transactions, all of the phone calls, emails, and video of every single person in the United States. It's a very small sum of money. You should Google that with my name, the Brookings Institution report, The Dynamics of Dissent. Put my name in behind it, Brandon Turbeville, and Activist Post. It should come up. And take a look at that and see if you don't believe that your governments are far ahead of you in terms of surveillance and what they've been telling you for many years. I would hope that none of the listeners are under the impression that they have anything called the Fourth Amendment or constitutional rights or human rights or God-given rights in this country. Because you don't. You're going to have to take those rights back because they were taken from you a long time ago. To be honest, they were never really given to you. It's just a good propaganda move to tell you that they were. Back to the article. But while the concerns centered around the privatization of a virtual database are very real, as are those regarding identity theft, hacking, and centralization, the reality of the situation is much more grave than many of the opponents of the UK virtual ID are letting on. The true nature of the virtual ID scheme is rooted in the ultimate goal of creating an all-encompassing top-down cashless society combined with a total information awareness network which includes every aspect of individual life. While a decentralized voluntary virtual ID with allegedly built-in protections may seem like a far cry from a forced omnipotent surveillance state or a national ID, The fact is that the new scheme is merely one more step in that direction. Obviously, the program will not be voluntary for long. As I have discussed in previous articles, the introduction of a program such as a national ID card, biometric data, or cashless payment technologies is always followed by the program becoming mandatory. The ultimate goal of an all-encompassing cashless surveillance program with no opt-out provisions is always introduced by stealth and the gradualist technique. At first, the program is introduced as a way to speed up transactions, increase efficiency, and provide convenience. Soon, however, governments and businesses begin to transition out of the older methods of payment and identification and focus more on the new technology. Identification using the traditional methods remain as an option but become viewed as cumbersome. Eventually, the alternative methods are phased out completely and mandates replace what was once a personal choice. In the end, the statements and reassurances issued by the UK government, or any other government for that matter, should hold very little water with the English people. In terms of the development of virtual and/or biometric databases, government agencies have a track record of 0% when it comes to both honesty and integrity, or having the best interests of their people at heart. What governments cannot accomplish out in the open, they will accomplish by the back door, as any American who has had any experience with programs such as IDENT, NGI, and ESCOM can attest to. And I've got some links in this article to the IDENT, NGI, and ESCOM programs. These are essentially backdoor national ID biometric databases that some of them are allegedly to keep a database of illegal immigrants or terror suspects. I laugh as I say that. But you can click on them and read how all-encompassing they are. Many of them, of course, encompass American citizens, and they have been for some time. If you haven't heard of those programs, you should go check up on them, and you might realize rather quickly why you haven't heard of them. I would imagine that there's many more than this floating around here in the United States. History and experience both have shown that governments cannot be trusted to tell the truth regarding potentially dangerous technologies and surveillance policies, much less to be trusted to operate these programs with responsibility. It is for this reason that the English people must view the new virtual ID scheme with more than just a healthy dose of skepticism. Now, of course, as I mentioned in the article, and as I've been mentioning as we've been discussing this, any program such as UIDs or mobile phone access logins through big corporations is going to be promoted as convenient, and that's exactly what the UK government is saying, that this is not mandatory. You can access your government services via your phone, and it'll be more convenient for you, and it'll free up the system for the other participants in the social safety net or welfare system in the UK. And that's obviously going to be quite the selling point, unfortunately. But that's only how it starts. Eventually, because the program will be successful, there's no doubt that thousands and thousands of zombies will leap to the program. Eventually, it will be made mandatory, and the old methods of accessing the services will be faded out. Eventually, you won't even have a choice. That's what history teaches us in these types of programs. We'll be back in a minute right after this.
UCY.TV. The future is in your hands.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. You can catch us here on UCY.TV, here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll also rebroadcast on Friday nights as well, here on UCY.TV. Before we went to the break, we were talking about the new national ID, backdoor national ID scheme in the UK, using mobile phones to access government services, virtual identification, if you will. And it's definitely something to be concerned about. It's happening all over the world because it's a global agenda. That's why it's happening globally. It's happening here in the United States. as well. Definitely something to be concerned about. But I also mentioned early on in the broadcast that there are times when I become concerned about the alternative media in general and how we often have a data overload where we constantly banter back and forth about the new methods of tyranny being unrolled right before our eyes. I heard Alan Watt describe this as being like lab rats, where every morning we get together and we chatter and about what the scientists are going to do to us today. Right? Well, are they going to shock us? Are they going to put chemicals in our eyes? Are they going to make us run on the little wheel? What are they going to do? What are they going to do? And that's true. That's true because oftentimes in the alternative media, that's all we do. We complain about the problem, and our diagnosis is spot on oftentimes. Our diagnosis is correct, and we've been proven over and over and over to be right in our predictions, and not everyone, but by and large, in our predictions and our diagnosis of the problem. But once you recognize what the problem is, and of course this is important because more and more people are coming to awareness every day, so you have to have someone out there reporting the problem so people can become aware of the problem. The issue, however, is once you become aware of the problem, what do you do about it? Because we can complain and complain and complain, and nothing will ever change. I can assure you that the system, the establishment, the New World Order, for short, the globalists, the oligarchs, they couldn't care less if we complain, because that's just something to occupy our time and to make us miserable. What they care about is coordinated action, and that can take many forms. That can take forms of simply pulling out of the system where you can. Something as simple as not shopping at Walmart, not taking vaccines, trying to avoid GMO as best you can. But it's going to take other forms of resistance as well. It's going to take some coordinated political action, because a lot of times when you're presenting your critique of the current system as it exists, you're going to be met with, what do we do about it? Okay, people are going to want to know what your solutions are, and by and large, with the notable exception of a few people in the alternative media, by and large, there are no solutions being offered. That's a shame, because at some point, if you want to change the system, if you want to replace the system, then you're going to have to come out and say what you want to replace it with. And we need to provide that alternative. Now, as I said again earlier on, I am no laissez-faire capitalist. I am no Austrian school economist. I reject those economics. I bear no ill will of those people here in the alternative media who do. I recognize that's a popular way of thinking. Unfortunately, it's wrong, and it's based largely in ignorance. So what I wanted to do is produce an opportunity for coordinated political action that does not embrace the Austrian school, or at least at this point we can only hope that it does not. That's the United Front Against Austerity. On October the 22nd, the United Front Against Austerity will be convening from 12 to 6 p.m., 56 Walker Street in New York City. And if you can attend, I think this would be a great thing to take part in, because what this is going to do is going to address some of the concerns that many Americans have that they're not getting, that's providing solutions that obviously they're not going to be getting from Mittens Romney and Barack Obama, the Democrats and the Republicans, who are owned by the same people and implement the agenda promoted by the same people. This is real people providing real solutions that doesn't involve cutting your Social Security, your Medicare, your Medicaid, throwing you out on the street in favor of the banks, and so forth, ending your unemployment all on the basis of an ideology which has failed at every conceivable opportunity. Even the glory years of this ideology is quite miserable when you realize that most of the movies you've seen about this period of time are propaganda and represent individuals who are not of your own social strata. So no austerity, no Austrian school economics. But the UFFA, the United Front Against Austerity, you can find their website. It's againstausterity.org. I encourage you all to attend there. Just to read a little bit from their press release, it says, austerity, the imminent existential threat to the American people. No matter the outcome of the November elections in the U.S., working families will be thrown over the proverbial fiscal cliff in the name of debt and deficits. Cutting Social Security, Medicare, and other threads in our fragile social fabric is not only grossly unjust, it won't work. The so-called grand bargain threatens to unleash a death spiral of unemployment and poverty which our nation is not certain to survive. Organizing to defend our economic rights. It is for this reason that we must organize now to mobilize effective opposition to the impending austerity offensive. Agitate to shift the burden of the economic depression onto Wall Street oligarchs, and to build momentum toward a genuine political revolution of, by, and for the people. It goes to tell you that this is not a conference. This is not going to be something where a bunch of tired party hacks stand up and give congratulatory speeches and glad hand the attendees there in the conference. This is an assembly. The UFFA Public Assembly on October 27th will not be just another conference that ends when the doors close. Participants will hear proposals from distinguished speakers, engage in floor debate, and vote on vital strategic matters. The UFFA intends to build on Wisconsin and Occupy with decisions, demands, and actions. And I have been informed, and I hope this is accurate, that there will be simply a majority rule. No stupid consensus at this conference. There will be no ridiculous general assemblies, so be prepared for more logical methods of decision making than George Soros foolishness. So again, againstausterity.org, check it out. If you're in the area on October the 27th, you should definitely attend. Briefly, I want to mention an article that just came out recently that I wrote dealing with Mitt Romney's neocon advisors. I've done articles on this before, 2 articles on Mitt Romney's neocons before. I guess it would be more accurate to say the neocons Mitt Romney, but nevertheless, it's called Open War Policy Revealed by Romney's Neocon Advisors. It's up at activistpost.com. And it says, on October 1st, 2012, presidential hopeful Mitt Romney outlined his own version of imperialist American foreign policy before the Virginia Military Institute. What Romney described was, in its goals, no different than that of any other president since JFK. As was made clear in his speech, the presentation of the mutated manifest destiny to be ushered in by Romney would be significantly more open than the leading from behind destabilization and coalition-based Obama treachery, as the candidate has clearly stated this on more than one occasion. Essentially, what I'm saying here is that they're both tools, Romney and Obama. You're crazy for voting for either one. They're both imperialists. They both are going to further the globalist agenda. Only Obama will do it in a much more covert way. Romney is a return to the hard-nosed Bush era. Back to the article. Essentially, while Obama has continued and accelerated every disastrous policy of the Bush administration, Romney has openly announced his intention to do the same. The only difference is that the Romney Doctrine will supplant the deceitful, secretive, and treacherous nature of Obama's foreign policy for a more ham-fisted and brazenly aggressive position. However, while the latter option is reminiscent of George W. Bush's Iraq adventure, the fact is Romney's presentation of American imperialism will no doubt be more cleverly constructed using the threat against American interests, our friends and allies, as justification. In his speech, Romney stated, and this is Romney's direct quote, "If America does not lead, others will. Others who do not share our interests and our values, and the world will grow darker for our friends, Israel, for our friends and for us. I am running for president because I believe the leader of the free world has a duty to our citizens and to our friends everywhere, Israel, and to use America's great influence wisely, with solemnity, and without false pride, but also firmly and actively, to shape events in ways that secure our interests, further our values, prevent conflict, and make the world better. Not perfect, but better. End quote. Romney's plan thus echoes yet more of the American exceptionalism that has been used as a cover for imperialist ventures for decades. It is, after all, an illusion that the majority of the American people have bought into after years of movies, television, and related propaganda. Yeah, and that's true. It's unfortunate that so many Americans have completely bought into this American exceptionalism nonsense, where it's sort of a foregone conclusion that it's the job of the United States to spread democracy across the world. Back to the article. In this regard, Romney could scarcely be more clear, a rarity, as to what plans he holds for the United States military should he be elected. And again, that's true. This is one of the rare moments where Romney's actually saying something true that he won't turn around and change in the next day, depending on the audience that he's speaking to. For instance, Romney stated, "It is the responsibility of our president to use America's great power to shape history, not to lead from behind, leaving our destiny at the mercy of events. Unfortunately, that is exactly where we find ourselves in the Middle East under President Obama." End quote. Aside from the obvious falsity of Romney's political jockeying regarding where we find ourselves in the Middle East, the Republican candidate's statement seems to offer a brief representation of yet more American exceptionalism, an even more warped version of manifest destiny, and the Freemasonic doctrine of directing nature and controlling the force of the people. If you don't understand that, go read Albert Pike. Of course, the United States is no passive player in the Middle East under Barack Obama. Indeed, even the casual observer should be aware that the United States, along with other Anglo-American NATO powers, has directed and controlled the Arab Spring and destabilization of Middle Eastern countries from the beginning. However, because of the Obama administration's penchant for leading from behind and directing the overthrow of sovereign governments via intelligence networks, pawning, destabilization efforts, and coalition-based kinetic military action, the talking heads on the conservative right are able to play upon the wasteland of the average American mind and subsequently propagandize that the Obama-Brzezinski method exemplifies weakness. The neocon method, being more upfront, aggressive, and direct, is unfortunately the only presentation simple enough to capture the average American attention span and is understood as strength. Thus, the Romney campaign does not criticize the Obama administration for waging wars against Islam, sovereign nations, state-owned banks, or secular governments. Its criticisms are that it does not do so in a faster, more aggressive manner. A perfect example of both the political posturing and of the identical nature of both candidates and their respective parties can easily be seen in terms of the Syrian destabilization, itself directed by the Anglo-American NATO forces in order to weaken and provoke the Iranians and the Russians, implement a system of privatized central banks, exploit the people and resources of Syria, and ignite the subsequent Third World War that must inevitably follow. In this regard, Romney firmly stated in Virginia that he will arm al-Qaeda forces operating inside Syria and will help them, quote, to obtain the arms they need to defeat Assad's tanks, helicopters, and fighter jets, end quote. For those of you who don't know, the arms to defeat tanks, helicopters, and fighter jets are not pea shooters here. These aren't small 45s and hunting rifles. That's fairly serious weaponry. Of course, Obama is already arming the Syrian terrorists, but the vast majority of Americans are completely oblivious to this fact, as they are to the fact that the rebels are actually fanatic terrorists, so the issue exists as a prime opportunity for political grandstanding. Of course, no Romney foreign policy speech would be complete without some measure of beating the drums of war against Iran. Needless to say, the Virginia Military Institute foreign policy speech was complete. In regards to Iran, Romney stated, quote, "We must make clear to Iran through actions, not just words, that their nuclear pursuit will not be tolerated," end quote. He also committed to tighten the sanctions and, quote, "restore the permanent presence of aircraft carrier task forces in both the eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf region," end quote. Romney said he would allow no daylight between the United States and Israel. as if there is any. Like the references to war with Iran, it appears that no Romney speech will be complete without reference to the relationship between Israel and the United States and how American foreign policy might be outsourced to the colonial state of Israel. While many Americans Romney stated that he would ask Benjamin Netanyahu what he wanted the United States to do, and that he would do it. That's outsourcing your foreign policy to a foreign country. Now, of course, we know the globalist agenda in this regard, but assuming that you don't, one would hope that that would raise the ire of any observer, that the United States president would consider asking another president what he would prefer us to do, and then do it. Not good policy. While many Americans are still caught in the trap of voting for one of the two political parties, which are only different branches of the same tree, more and more are becoming aware of the fact that the presidents and presidential candidates are nothing more than puppets and tools. To suggest that these hapless and damaged individuals hold any true sway over the direction of the country in real life, regardless of their potential to do so, would be optimistic to say the least. With this in mind, it is important to take a look at those individuals doing some of the legwork for the foreign policy presented through the two-sided mouth of Mitt Romney. Indeed, it is particularly revelatory that many of Romney's advisors are not only members of organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, but also of neocon think tanks like the Project for a New American Century of 9/11 fame. You do remember the Project for the New American Century was the think tank that called for a new Pearl Harbor, that lamented the fact that the direction that they wanted the country to go in would not be achieved without a new Pearl Harbor. Specifically, Romney foreign policy advisors such as Elliot Cohen, Robert Kagan, John Lehman, Vin Weber, and top advisor Dov Zakheim are all members of PNAC, Project for a New American Century. Thus, with so many direct connections to an organization like PNAC, among many others, it is much more clear as to why the Romney rhetoric sounds so familiar to what we heard for 8 years under the Bush administration. Nevertheless, as I wrote in my article, Romney's foreign policy advisors exposed as globalists, considering Romney's attendance at the 2012 Bilderberg meeting and the apparent tendency of the elite in leaning to Romney as the next president, it is imperative that those who are aware of the forces truly guiding the United States and the rest of the world be prepared to shift gears, even if it is only temporary, and begin to expose Mitt Romney as the criminal globalist that he is. Still, we must guard against being played like a tennis ball and rushing back into the arms of Bush on steroids Barack Obama. Unless we become significantly more streetwise than the general public has been in the past, the condition of the world will only continue to degenerate with every election, regardless of the results. Below is a list of Mitt Romney's foreign policy advisors, complete with lists to many, but not all, of their groups, organizations, and affiliations that should be the focus of much concern. And there I've listed many of these individuals, and we don't have time to go into the affiliations that they have. There's just too many. It would require a lot of explaining, and it would also bore you to tears. But the individuals: Kofor Black, Christopher Burnham, Michael Chertoff, Elliot Cohen, Norm Coleman, John Delinovich, Paul Dobriansky, Eric Edelman, Michael Hayden, Kerry Healy, Kim Holmes, Robert Joseph, Robert Kagan, John Lehman, Walid Perez, Pierre Prosper, Mitchell Rice, Daniel Senor, Jim Talent, Vin Weaver, Richard Williamson, and Dov Zakheim. I've got all of these listed here in the article. It took quite a while to put this information together with all of their lists of affiliations and organizations, but it's there with links. If you have any doubt, you can click on the links and it'll bring you to the information. It's something that you might want to check out. It's really unbelievable that these few individuals have such connections in the think tank neocon world, as well as the Council on Foreign Relations and other related organizations. To shift gear here from foreign policy back to the domestic front, I read an article I think if it wasn't the last broadcast, it was the one before about Leah Lynn Plant, um, the girl from Portland, Oregon, whose house was raided by Portland police and the FBI in search of anarchist literature, and also in search of dangerous items like black clothing. Right? She was arrested. She was brought before a grand jury where she refused to testify, and you can find my article on that. It's up at Activist Post. You can also just Google any number of independent stories, independent organizations that have information about her. And she refused to testify to the grand jury. She was resubpoenaed to testify in front of the grand jury again, where she also refused to testify. The little blurb says, Leah is a 24-year-old political prisoner currently serving time at FDC SeaTac. Yeah, she was, the second time around, she went to the grand jury, and she refused to testify. She was sent to jail for civil contempt. And she can stay in jail up to 500 days. When she comes out, she could be resubpoenaed again, and if she refuses to testify, she may just be found guilty of criminal contempt, and she could stay in jail for a very long time. Leah is an anarchist, but so what? You have a right to be an anarchist. There's no evidence to put her anywhere near any crime. There's no evidence that she has any evidence of who committed the crime. I wouldn't doubt that the police themselves perhaps committed the crime. And let's not forget that she was actually raided to see if she possessed anarchist literature and black clothing. That's their justification. But she's in jail now. She's sitting in jail because she tried to exercise her Fifth Amendment and refused to testify to the kept juries known as grand juries, where they simply, if they can't get you one way, if they can't just kick down your door and come up with some type of prosecution, they subpoena you, they drag you through the grand jury process, they drag your name through the mud, they make you expend a lot of financial resources that I'm sure that most people don't have. But again, there's a website, it's called freeleah.org, freeleah.org. If you want to keep up with what's happening with Leah Lynn Plant, or if you want to write her in prison, because she's obviously a hardened criminal, even though she didn't possess the horrible items of terrorist nature that were included on the search warrant. Even though she hasn't actually done anything, she is in prison, so you can feel free to write her. I'll give you that address. It's Leah Lynn Plant, again, Leah-Lynn-Plante, number 42611-086, number 42611-086, FDC SeaTac, SEATAC, P.O. Box 13900, Seattle, Washington 98198. If you want to write her in prison, send her some books or something to entertain herself while she has her stay in the model living conditions of the United States, also known as the prison system. In the remaining minutes, I want to draw some attention to an article I did some time ago called The Myth of Vaccine Safety and Effectiveness. I'd encourage you all to pull this up because as the flu season, the alleged flu season, comes in, you're going to see an upsurge in propaganda for flu vaccines. I'm seeing it where I live, and of course the little Nazi doctors and the white-coated priesthood are going just ecstatic. They're ecstatic with their propaganda for the vaccines, and they love their doomsday propaganda. If you don't get the vaccine, you will get the flu, you will go to the hospital, you possibly could die. In fact, you probably will die. In fact, scratch that. If you don't get the flu vaccine, you will absolutely die. And so will your children and all the puppies in the world. So it's that ridiculous. The statistic, I'm intentionally being ridiculous, but the statistics show that most of the people, and I think the numbers are 85% of the people who have the flu, turn out to not have the flu. 85% have flu-like illness. All right, and the 15% of the remaining 15% who actually did have the flu, a sizable portion of them, again, you don't quote me on this, go check it up on your own. These are CDC statistics. I haven't looked at it in months. But of the remaining 15% that actually do have the flu, a sizable portion of those individuals, I think it's 70 to 80%, had the flu shot. So if you look at that, look at those statistics, then it's pretty clear that getting the flu shot actually makes you more likely to get the flu. As well as autism, if you're a child, autoimmune diseases, if you're a child or an adult, or any other kind of very unpleasant health problems that can result from taking these toxin-laden vaccinations, which have never been proven to even be effective. There's never been a study done that shows vaccines are safe or that they're even effective that hasn't been tied back to a drug company or a pharmaceutical company. Never been one. The independent studies at best show that the results are negligible, meaning that they can't tell one way or the other. Maybe it helps a minute amount of people. Maybe it doesn't. We don't know. So that's what the independent studies say. But I want to draw your attention to this, to the myth of vaccine safety and effectiveness. We'll try to put this up here on the under the YouTube video when this comes out in the archive. Either way, you will be hearing a lot of propaganda regarding the mercury. Some will claim that there is no mercury in flu shots. That is BS. Thimerosal is made up of half mercury. They are in the flu shots. Thimerosal is in the flu shots. It is damaging to your brain. You'll probably be told not to worry because the shots contain, the thimerosal containing shots contain ethyl mercury, which is the inorganic mercury. The organic mercury, and it's actually harmless, right? It's harmless in these amounts. It's not like methyl mercury, which accumulates in tuna fish and so forth, that could be damaging to human health. Well, again, this is BS because in this article I linked to the studies that show that ethyl mercury that's in the shots is actually the most harmful, because ethyl mercury, while not as harmful at first glance, ethyl mercury actually metabolizes in the human body as methyl mercury. And in this strange feat of nature, oftentimes when ethyl mercury is metabolized, it somehow produces more methyl mercury in the body and in the brain specifically than it would have if the individual had consumed the methyl mercury that's in the tuna fish. And I have links to the studies and excerpts from the studies where they did these studies on monkeys and so forth. And I also mentioned how for many years both ethyl mercury and methyl mercury were used as fungicides. There was no difference between the two. Oddly enough, they were banned in that regard because of adverse health effects back in the 1970s. But they can stick it in your vaccines, and you'll take it because your doctor, the white-coated priesthood, will tell you that it's okay, and you'll believe it. With that in mind, we seem to have reached the end of the broadcast. I'm Brandon Turbeville. This is Truth on the Tracks. We're here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Till next week.
Oh, well, I love you, pretty baby. You're the only love I've ever known. Just as long as you stay with me.